But here's one bit of news. Are you familiar with any of the Dungeons and Dragons drama?
That was one of the things we were going to talk about later, but let's do it now.
Too bad.
Yeah, so we actually got I just want to see who I've got this from.
Please.
We got it a number of times, but Niels wrote in about that.
He got it in first.
He said everything going down with Dungeons and Dragons. And he said it is legit interesting, and Mason has talked about D&D before. I was hoping you could answer this because I saw bits and pieces. And of course, we're getting a big Dungeons and Dragons movie this year.
Well, we're going to talk about that. So, I think we talked about in previous weeks, probably in relation to the Dungeons and Dragons movie, that apparently in internal emails with Wizards of the Coast and who run Dungeons and Dragons, who are owned by Hasbro, they have said there was some internal emails that suggested that we need to do more monetization of Dungeons and Dragons and how we're going to make that happen. Because, of course, if you play the tabletop game, it's more a case of just like if you have the source books, you can
even print off a PDF
or do
it off an iPad.
You can just remember it. I'm sure there are Dungeons and Dragons games out there, like Dungeons and Dragons veterans, who can just remember every stat off the top of their head.
And that is the beauty of it. It's like it's basically some books and dice and some imagination, Mason. But they don't want that, do they?
No.
Big D&D.
No, exactly. So so prior to this we had 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons and the new version they're working on is called 1D&D, and a lot of people are like, what are they going to do with this? What are they going to do, you know? And there is some like subscription services you can get if you wanted like, you know, virtual dungeon environments, and if you want like you know, mapping software and all this sort of stuff.
I think all that's great. If you're making something additional. Yeah, definitely have a paywall is what I'm saying.
So for literally years, for like decades, Dungeons & Dragons has had what's called an open game license, and it's basically third-party companies can create modules like adventures and monsters and, you know, unofficial content, and they don't have to pay a licensing fee.
Yeah.
But basically what happened is IO9 discovered a leaked draft of this new version of the OGL 1.1, and it basically placed a bunch of restrictions on the third-party content and required companies to pay Wizards of the Coast 25% royalties if they reach a certain amount of revenue.
Yep.
And a lot of people were like, I'm done with this. I'm done with this thing that, you know, was ordinarily free for a lot of people. And a lot of people have, you know, based their entire companies based
Absolutely.
around, you know,
I know there's like a number of YouTube channels and podcasts, like Sandspans for one, like do D&D related stuff like all the time. Yeah.
And I mean, you know, and for a lot of, for I would say for most people who do this sort of stuff, that particular thing wouldn't affect you.
No.
Because you don't, it's something like $750,000. If you make $750,000 plus, they'll take 25% of your revenue. But there was a bunch of other stuff like in this OGL, it's like, okay, if you make a third party D&D anything and it's on their radar, they can just use it if they want.
Yes, absolutely.
They can just be like, oh, these characters are ours now. You can still make them, but...
Do you think this has something to do with the movie coming out this year? And they've already taken a run at it. But this new one's got like Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez and a bunch of other Justice Smith and a bunch of other people in it.
Yeah.
And they're pushing it to be like a big adventure film that's hopefully going to make $1 billion for them. And
it won't.
Well, it could.
It could, but
and then it drives people to the game.
I think I've mentioned
and to monetization.
I think I've mentioned this before, but whenever I go to the movie, in the last 3 or 4 times I've gone to the movies, I've seen the Honor Among Thieves trailer, but they've cut it down. They've cut it down to like 30 seconds.
Oh,
and they've taken all the jokes out and they've ruined the pacing of it. And every time I watch the trailer, I see people in the audience go, ugh.
Yeah. Do you think that's because there was that initial backlash of like, well, this is silly. But if you ever played Dungeons and Dragons, it's silly.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
It gets silly very quickly. Part of that trailer, depending who you're with, obviously.
The best part of the trailer is we see, you know, charismatic leading man Chris Pine, and they're like, you're bad at this. But like every character's like, you suck at this. And then he does a little leap at the end. He does a little flying V guitar leap, but he's on a little lute. That's a bit fun. But anyway, this was on Reddit. I don't know if this is true, but why not start the year with rampant speculation?
Agreed.
It might all be lies. But apparently Hasbro really needs Honor Among Thieves to work out for them because they have to convince the shareholders that this is a worthwhile thing.
Dungeons and Dragons or their movie division?
Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Okay, this is
I mean, they already did Battleship.
This is from an investor on Reddit called Super Fun Pop.
Okay.
The motivations behind Wizards changes are 100% influenced by Hasbro, and I'll tell you why. Hasbro was confronted by an activist investor which is an owner of like a lot of shares in Hasbro.
Sure.
Who was very outspoken, wanting changes. They wanted to spin off Wizards of the Coast into a second company. Without getting too deep into this part, what would this mean is that Wizards of the Coast would no longer contribute to the value of Hasbro and would be its own stock. This would lead to Hasbro's stock becoming discounted because Wizards of the Coast make up roughly 70% of Hasbro's value.
Right.
But a lot of the investors are like, oh, Hasbro, it's Transformers.
Yeah.
But apparently there's so much more money in Wizards of the Coast because they did Magic the Gathering.
Sure,
and they did Dungeons and Dragons and that sort of stuff. Hasbro had a public fight for control with this activist investor in June of 2022. This means Wizards is still owned by Hasbro, but has a big consequence. Before 2022, Hasbro shareholders had no idea what Wizards of the Coast, D&D, or Magic the Gathering was. Shareholders only knew about Transformers, Monopoly, and Peppa Pig.
Isn't that wild? If it's 70% and they're just like, what's this?
Yeah, they thought Hasbro's money came from toys, TV, and movies.
Which, by the way, if you look at, I've got a list of their movies that they've made here.
Yeah.
And aside from the Transformers, that is not the case because it's Clue, the Power Rangers movies, and there's been a few. There's the first Dungeons and Dragons movie and then the direct-to-DVD spin-off. A bunch of couple of G.I. Joe movies that didn't do super well. Battleship, Ouija, Gem and the Holograms, another Power Rangers movie, and then Snake Eyes. So like these are
this is the year of us reviewing Snake Eyes.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But this is what they've got coming up. More G.I. Joe movies, Beyblade, Monopoly, Hacker Camp, Action Man, Clue, Furby, Untitled Transformers Optimus film, Play-Doh movie, Rom the Space Knight, Mask, another Power Rangers movie, another Untitled G.I. Joe spin-off.
Right.
Yeah, anyway, sorry, go on.
So Hasbro has to prove to the shareholders that it continues to make Wizards of the Coast profitable. If it can't prove it, the big investors will come in and talk about spinning it off again.
Right.
So Hasbro will suddenly just lose this huge thing. So Hasbro has to deliver with honor among thieves, otherwise it's going to look very bad. Shareholders are going to be peed off.
But again, shouldn't they be happy that it's already doing well outside of this movie that's going to make $1 billion?
Great question. Well, I think the idea would be that they want to spin off Wizards of the Coast because the rest of it, the remaining 30%, is kind of dead weight.
Right, okay.
Yeah, anyway. Hasbro's been telling shareholders for a year that Wizards can't operate on their own, and the only reason Wizards is making money is because Hasbro's overseeing it. Hasbro has to put their money where their mouth is and dig into the trenches with Wizards to prove they're valuable. Otherwise, shareholders can force Hasbro to spin off from Wizards. So basically, Honor Among Thieves has to do really, really well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll be like, why are you controlling this? You don't know what you're doing kind of thing. So
Great.
Yeah, really good.
This is going to be a good year for D&D. For
so.
us, it's going to be very entertaining no matter what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, like, this new OGL for Dungeons & Dragons is super unpopular.
Yeah.
And it's going to, like, it also seems to be retroactive, so they can take, like, if you made old D&D modules back in the day,
they can just dip into that.
Oh, we like those. We'll have those.
Because I know this has been a thing with like the modding community will like make things for video games and whatever, and then they'll just straight steal that or shut it down.
Yeah,
you know, like Nintendo were doing a thing for a time where they just demonetize or take the money from any YouTube video that like did like reviews or anything related to Nintendo content.
Yeah.
This way of thinking is like it's destructive. And they don't seem to be aware of that.
But anyway, huge backlash, and then Wizards basically were like, "Yes, this is true. Like this draft is real.
Oh, okay.
But we're taking a bunch of it out now."
Yeah.
So the backlash worked.
Because you caught us.
Yeah, you got us. So they're like, we wanted to shut down people making blockchain games and NFTs. The new OGL will not contain any of the controversial provisions of the draft, including the royalty structure, the back license agreement, or the deauthorization of previous OGL versions.
Right.
Wizards went further to say that it and the community won because it always planned to solicit the input of the community before any update.
Disagree.
Yeah, I disagree. They're big lies. The thing that you mentioned, I think, earlier, the G.I. Joe stuff, we also saw this week.
Yeah.
Channing Tatum took a lie detector test. Did you see that?
I didn't know.
And he on YouTube, not for crime purposes.
Oh, okay, cool.
But he confirmed the rumor that
they made him do it.
They made him do the. He turned down G.I. Joe 7 times. The first G.I. Joe 7 times.
Yeah.
But the movie studio had an option on him, which meant he had to do a movie at some point, and he's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
This will do, I guess. And then he requested to be killed in the first 10 minutes of the second one.
And he was.
And he was.
Good movies all round, I think. Yeah.